Torah Or. We're going to be learning about the name change of Abram Avinu. So let's bring up the text. Okay, I think this is it. So towards the end of this week's parsha, we learn that Hashem tells Avram by circumcision that no longer is his name going to be Avram without the hey sound or letter. It's going to be Avraham. So the pasuk says, "V'lo yikarei oid shimcha Avram." No longer will you be called Avram. V'haya shimcha Avraham. Going forward, your name will be Avraham. Why? What's the hey add? Ki av hamoin goyim. The H adds that you are going to be, you're the father now of all the nations. So what happens? The Rebbe wants to explain what happened in circumcision that changed in Avram, that now he's called Avraham. So the Rebbe says that the idea is ki hatam lemila. What's the idea of circumcision? Tichsiv asher bara lekim lasos. God created the world lasos, so we should do, and it's brought down in the Medrash that lasos means to do, means l'sakin, to fix. It means the world was made that we should complete it or fix it. The word tikkun is to fix it, so it's not 100%, and it needs to be fixed. Shadayin tzarech tikkun adei adam, that God made the world in such a way that man has to complete its fixing, to make it complete. Ki hagam shekvar bar lekimus adam loy baroi b'shleimus. Although man was created, first man was created before Avram, about 1,500 years before. So he says that's the man was created but not complete. Now, what a man starts is go through, a person has to complete the purpose of creation. We're on top of page 9 in the PDF, to the right-hand side. The Medrash says, Sheshal alamila. The Medrash says that the rabbis were asked, or the question was raised about circumcision, meaning, im chaviva hi hamila, if it's important. Chaviva means the word chaviv is special. If it's precious to God, the concept of circumcision. Lama nivra adamara. Why was a person created uncircumcised? Why do we have to circumcise? Why do we have to do the process of circumcision if it's special? So it should be like Mila. Like we said, women are considered like as if they were created with circumcision, not unlike the men were not like that. They have to go through a process. And the answer was, that's the idea of lasos. There's a concept of fixing, and for men, one of the things of fixing is going through the process of circumcision. He gives an example. Turmoisin is a kind of lentils or beans that need to be processed in order to be ready to eat. That the person has to soak them and all the things you have to do to make the lentils edible. So why does he have to go through the process? Why couldn't God just have created that the lentils, the turmoisin, should be created in such a way that you could just cook them or eat them? Why do we have to go through a process? They're very hard and they have to be softened. So the idea is because the world wasn't created complete. And there's different things that need tikkunim, needs tikkun, fixing. Means the tikkun, what the Rebbe is coming, what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is that maybe unlike conventional wisdom, that the idea of tikkun or tikkun olam, fixing, is that we broke the world, so we have to fix it, right? Where you tell a child, you broke it, you fix it. But it was given to you complete. No, the world was created lacking certain things, and it needs to be fixed. And in Avram, he needed to go through, one of the things he needed to go through in his process of tikkun was the circumcision. What does this mean? So he says, that's known, a Maamar that we say, and this is based on the Maamar is said, but the Baal Shem Tov teaches us based on this statement that says, the God, and the word chidush. He sort of says he reinvents in his kindness, every day, tamid, consistently, that God has to recreate constantly. And the Baal Shem Tov says the world needs to be constantly in the process of creation to exist. It's not that God creates it and then it disconnects. So he says, Tamid hu chidush yesh mi'ayin. God constantly has to create yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing, because the nothingness of the world the world will go back to its nothingness. Hey Judith, the world will go back to its nothingness if a person doesn't go through the process, if Hashem doesn't continue to create it. I mean, if the world is not in a creation on its own, it has to be constantly given a life force to stay in existence. How do you create? Hisavas means to create something material, physical, the physical world, from nothingness, from spirituality. So how do you create? How does godliness and spirituality create a physical creation? So much so that it has to be created constantly. So you can't, because spirituality is spiritual. How does spiritual create physical? So there has to be the concept, this is the idea of the tzimtzum, which is what we learn about in the Maamar of Lech Chavayera, is v'hivdila haparoiches lechem ben hakodesh. Just like in the temple, the separations between the different levels of holiness. We know there was the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, there was the Holy, and then there was the Azara, there was the outside space. How did you separate these spaces? Through the parochas, through the curtain. And the curtain wasn't just so you shouldn't see what's going on, but it separates the holiness and it contains and gives out a smaller level of holiness in between through the process, like a screen or like sunglasses, like it kind of dims the light, the power, so you could go through a process and eventually create a physical space. Ki Beis HaMikdash, for instance, the temple. Sham Hayu Makar Hashpah, that's where the flow of godliness and life and creation was. V'gili Hashchin b'Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the revelation of godliness in the Holy of Holies, like it says, the temple, the ark wasn't part of the space. It means space it wasn't accountable in the Holy of Holies. The ark if you measured the space of the Holy of Holies and you measured from one side of the ark to the wall and from the other side of the ark to the wall, the measurement of the ark didn't take up space. It's miraculous. Why? Because there was a higher level of revelation in the Holy of Holies. So how does it go from the Holy of Holies back into the world? And it goes through a process from the Kodesh, where the menorah was, and the table and this golden altar, and from there he went out to the outside altar. So what was the process of going through these levels of holiness? It had to be less of a revelation. And the parochas, the curtain between the Holy of Holies and the Holies, was the first level of separation in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple. If the light just was just singular, a single style of light within the temple, because if it was just one without any separation, it would all be one level. There wouldn't be Holy of Holies, holy, the outside space. It would be one level of holiness. There's nothing to separate the levels of holiness. Had to be separated by the curtain, which is like a screen. And that separated the Holy of Holies from the outside of the Holy of Holies. And then the revelation went to the next level, which is called the Holy. So the place where the menorah was less revelation, and the proof was in all the levels of the miracles, A and B, who was allowed to be in the Holy of Holies, and when. The high priest only went in once a year in the time of Yom Kippur. Otherwise, he didn't go in. And when he went in, there was all these conditions for the high priest to go into the Holy of Holies. Whereas some of the other priests, there were other times the other priests went into the holy, but other priests, anyone who was not the high priest, could never go into the Holy of Holies. And what is the idea of the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the holy, the Kodesh HaKadoshim from the Kodesh? So unkelis, so that the translation in Targum in Aramaic is parsa, which means a separation. And there were many levels of separation of these parochas, of these curtains that separated the level of holiness that it contained, it only to be in the Holy of Holies, only in the Holy, only in the Azara, etc. Mishkan, the same thing applied to the tabernacle. And that's an idea in general. That just like it was like that in the Holy Temple and the tabernacle, so too, that's how godliness comes into creation. That it goes into the world of Atzilus, the world of the highest world of emanation, where everything is obvious godliness. How do we go to a world where we live in now, where we don't see physical godliness? You see physicality, and you have to tell yourself that who created this, right? Abram Avinu had to tell the world that there was a God. Otherwise, it said, who says? Where could they even have the perception that there wasn't God? Is because the godliness goes through a process of the separation of the parochas, of the curtains. This is the idea of what it means that God, in His kindness, recreates constantly. It has to be a chiddush, because the process that godliness, it could go from, so to say, spirituality to physicality, has to be constant. Otherwise, it wouldn't allow itself to be contained. And through the screening and the separations, the light becomes as if it's a new light, constantly. Meaning a light that could give off the perception of separation. And that's why the further we get away from the higher level, so to say, of revelation, the less revelation there is, the more there's a feeling of separation. The more godliness is revealed, the less creation feels separate from godliness. Because that's its truth. The truth is there is no separation. It's a facade. It's not true. Or shel toilada. It's a created light, because it's not true, to create the perception of separation. This is not the same original light. Like it says that God hid the light of the first day of creation, because had the light in the first day of creation shined in the world, it would be too strong, too powerful for what God wanted to accomplish with the creation, which is the perception of separation. And it goes through another level of separation. That's how physicality goes into existence. There's different levels of what it means to separate. How far do you separate? For instance, what did we say on Saturday night? When we make the Havdalah, the word Havdalah, which is the sort of say the ceremony that we complete Shabbos with the wine and the candle and the spices of smelling, it's called Havdalah. The word Havdalah means to separate. What are we saying when we do Havdalah? We're recognizing the separation between Shabbos and weekday. Shabbos is holier, weekday is mundane. So he says, for instance, there's a separation. We say b'matzi Shabbos, Hamavdil, God who separated ben kodesh, between the holiness of Shabbos l'chol, to the mundane, to the week. Shumasach Hamavdil gomer, and there's a major separation to go from an existence of Shabbos to chol, where our whole behavior changes. The way we live in this world, Shabbos has laws. You're not allowed to do certain things. The weekday is you're meant to go out and work and go do things. The separation of Shabbos and Chol is a huge separation. He calls it a Masech Mavdil Gomer, a total separation. The Shabbos is totally different than the week. It's not like we take on certain laws on Shabbos. It's a totally different existence. God, that's what we say. We recognize that in the process of Havdalah. Hamavdil, God who separated ben Kodesh l'chol, between holiness of the Shabbos and the mundane. And you can't compare the separation between Shabbos and the week to the separation of the Holy of Holies to the Holy in the temple, because there's all holy. The question is how much revelation. And in the time where the ark was in the Holy of Holies was much more revealed. And you go outside of the ark, past the curtain, it's holy, but it's not holy of holies. But on Shabbos, we say we're separating from the whole concept of holiness. Ben Kodesh to Chol, to mundane. That's as if how the light becomes so much more physical. That in time, right? Just like there's separation in space, the separation in time. The time of Shabbos is a total separate time than the time of the week. Because in the Holy of Holies, they're both holy. The question is Holy of Holies or just holy? And where do we see this? For instance, if everyone pays attention, that on a night that goes from Friday night, means from Saturday night, into Sunday night, that's holiday, you could have, let's say, the first day of the holiday is on a Shabbos. It happens many times. Or even Erev Yom Tif is Shabbos. And then you go into the next day of Yom Tif. So we do Havdalah during the Kiddush. And what do we say in the Havdalah? We don't say what we say during a regular Saturday night, that we say, Hamavdil, God who separates from holy to mundane. Because this Yom Tif is not mundane, but it's also not as holy as Shabbos. So then it's like the separation within the temple. So we say the actual language of the blessing is God who separates from holy from holiness. I mean, there's different levels of holiness. But we see clearly that there's separation within godliness, within time and space. But when we separate on a regular Saturday night, Matzah Shabbos, from the holiness of Shabbos all the way to the mundane of the week, not into the holiday, Who mosech shemaylim amaster or achnas nifrid mamish. The difference between Shabbos and the week and the mundane, the choil, is like it's separate. In the week you feel totally separate from godliness. Like in the temple, the outside chamber. And these also, sorry, not in the temple, in general, the idea of the spaces in creation that they could say, like it says in Yecheskel, we're going to read it in a few months, in the Haftorah after Shabbos Vayera, it says, Li Yairi, I created my own light. How could a creation think that it created its own light, that it's Li Yairi, I give off light, I manifest light? You give initial life, but after that, I'm my own being. Li Yairi, I also give off light. I also have something. Where's that I? Where's that separation? Because there's a mavdum and kodesh lechol. There's a separation from holiness to mundane. They say, yes, God is the God of gods, but I'm also a God. I'm also a creator of something. I'm also giving off light. I'm not passing the light. I'm creating the light. How could a person even think like that? They can't totally not recognize God's existence. Paro says, Li Yairi, I also have light. He recognizes God, but he says, I'm also a God. So where does that come from? From the mavdil, from the separation. From the separation allows for that perception that Paro could say that. So the separation within holiness and then the separation from holiness. What it means, hodu, from the gods of gods, for his kindness is always. His kindness allows for this perception that there's separation. Till a person thinks that he's the God, meaning God is the God of gods. I'm also a God. And there, that God allows in this darkness of perception, where a person thinks, and it's not just Paro standing there 3,000 years ago saying Li Yairi, that I give off light. Anytime a person has the feeling that they're the decision makers of the conclusion of how things are in their life, it's their efforts that create this. I'm so smart, I had a good idea, I'm so talented, that's why I'm successful. Anytime you separate yourself from the blessing of God, from the flow of God, that's saying Li Yairi, I also have my own life. Why am I wealthy? Why am I successful? Why am I good at what I do? Because I'm good, not because you're recognizing God's hand, God's blessing in that. And I think it's in Shiur, right? Shiur, he says, sorry, Yeshaya, that God is malbish, he encloses himself in like dark pots that separate. He clothes himself for the perception of separation. Now, in the mundane, when we say Hamavda ben Kodesh L'chol, now when we say, for instance, we don't say, on Saturday night, we don't say Hamavda ben Tomei L'Tahar. We don't mention negative on Saturday night. We mention the idea that of the weekday, of the mundane, of going out to the world of separation, where you have to work and you have to stay focused to say that my job is a vessel for God's blessing. But we don't say from pure to impure. So in weekday themselves, there's the positive of the week, where a person stays focused, and when there's a person gets lost in the week. So he says, when we say we separate on Saturday night from the holiness of Shabbos, from the time of Shabbos into the mundane, there's two levels of the weekday. Echad chol gomer, total weekday, total mundane. Echol is the places of klipas noga. The karle lekai, where a person thinks that they're separate from God. They think that it's not just Paro. It's anytime your life has in the space or time of your life, there's a separation of consciousness, of godliness with that moment, then you're separating yourself in that moment or in that place, or in that doing. So then it's that then that's total mundane. But there's another level of weekday, which when a person stays focused, which we know, and it's called chulin. Choil is also mundane. Like for instance, anything that's not choil is anything that's anything that's is the regular, right? The Kohanim had to eat the sacrifices or the tithings or other things that had to be kept in tahara. You had to be pure. There are times that you could just eat choil. You could eat a regular Yisrael, or a person who's eating meat. You don't have to be tar to eat meat. You don't have to be pure. But there's a concept of chulin shenasal taras hakodesh. There is the people that wanted to keep their mundane, their choil, to be on the principles of taras hakodesh, of purity and holiness. That means that they treated the mundane as if it was holiness, as if it was tithings, as if it was a sacrifice. So it's called chulin. When you take the chol, the mundane, the regular food, you went to the supermarket, you went to the butcher, you bought a piece of meat, but you treated that meat as if it was a sacrifice. Called chulin shenas al taras hakodesh, with the same rules that you would apply to holiness. Choyle shemoit, for instance, so that's in things, in Maisa. Where does that mean in time? Where do we see that in time? That's the space in between the holidays, which is called the chol moed. So it's chol, but also you add the component of holiday within the chol. The hainu, meaning to say, shenimshech ha'ara mikdusha v'chinas bita gam b'chol. What does this mean in our focus? That a person is able to apply, he or she, the same bittul, the same nullification that you have in holiness, in Shabbos, in the temple. So in time and space, you're applying it to your chol, to your mundane. You're never thinking alakai de alakai, that liya oiri, I'm also giving off light. And what is a person, how does a person bring that consciousness? It's, for instance, when a person recognizes the effect Shabbos has on the 6 days of the week. For instance, Shabbos gives off holiness. When we learned this many times, the first 3 days, Monday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, is drawing energy from the past Shabbos. From Wednesday, when we say L'chuna Ranana and the Hayom Yom, so then we start getting ready for the next Shabbos. We're drawing energy, so to say, from the coming Shabbos. And we've learned in the Sichos, the Rebbe talks how there's the Shabbos, how it affects the whole week, and how Shabbos affects half the week. But either way, the Shabbos is the whole week, if you have a proper consciousness, and that's what we say, Hayom Yom Rishon l'Shabbos, Sheni l'Shabbos. You're integrating Shabbos, the mindset of Shabbos, in the chol, into the mundane. How do we have that power? Because the Jewish people were given that ability to be able to integrate Shabbos into the week. What does that mean actually? That when you go out to the world, into the chol, into the weekday, your attitude is like the person in temple times who even chulin, even the mundane foods, behaved al taras hakodesh as if it was holiness. Means although you're out in the world and you're supposed to go out in the world but you're integrating the mindset of holiness into the chol. And this is what we're saying, Baruch HaMavdil, we're asking. It's not just a ceremony of recognition, so to say, like I said before, of holiness. It's the separation of Shabbos, the time of Shabbos in the week, but we're also bringing, Baruch means to bring, from Shabbos into Chol. She gives us the ability that the mundane, the week, should be done with the mindset and the attitude and the behavior of Taras HaKodesh, of the purity and holiness. And this is why it says that if you properly recognize Hashem's blessing in the week, so you say Sheishis Yamim Tasim Asecha, that in the 6 days of the week you do actions, but your mindset stays connected. We have to have 6 days a week. You have to go out to work. And it goes through a separation. That's why it's permissible and you're obligated to go out to work in the weekdays. We still say that we're separating holiness from chol, but we want to bring a bracha from kodesh into chol. Because if we just live like the times of Mashiach, so to say, Yom Shekuli Shabbos, that's another kind of reality, and then we would be totally nullified. For instance, when a person stands on the Amidah, where you're totally nullified to God and you're bowing, so that's during davening. But after davening, you go out to work. Like a person who we know that the law is that you're not allowed to make any kind of movement. If you make any movement that shows independence when you're standing in front of the king, it's almost worthy of the death sentence, because you're not allowed to show any independence in front of a king. That's the Shemona Esrei, that's the Kodesh. But nevertheless, that's outside of that space. When you go to the week, then it doesn't have that focus. Nevertheless, you have to apply and spice your mundane with the Kodesh of Shabbos, of the Kodesh of davening. Like it says, these ideas are go together. It's again, there's nefesh olam, there's olam shana nefesh. We have our soul, we have our time and our space. And the idea is that the olam shana nefesh, that the person's time, space, and being should be balanced. That you have, although there's different times and there's different spaces, There's the shul and outside the shul. There's the Shabbos outside of Shabbos. There's the way you are in the week, the way you are in Shabbos, the way you are in business, the way you are in shul. But the idea is that you shouldn't separate them totally. Although your behavior is different, but they have to be affected. The Shabbos, the holiness has to be Baruch Hamavda Ben Kodesh L'chol. That the holiness affects and directs, so to say, the attitude of the week. Like it says, you have to have yigiyah, you have to have effort in your hands, so to say, and that will allow you to eat. And that's alidei lam tes melachas, meaning you literally go out there, like the 39 doings or malachas that we have on Shabbos. Go out there, hazareya, you have to plant, you have to chayresh, you have to plow, hakoitzer, you have to cut down the branches and the trees when they need to be cut, or the fruits, which is going out to the world and doing what you have to do. And the idea is that when you go out to the world, and you have to go out to the world, that you want to eat, not just physically, but spiritually, is to be able to go out to the world and stay focused. And that's the chiddush. What does it mean, a mechadish betuvay? God's, what we said before, that the godliness goes through a process of the separations, of the screenings and the curtains. But there's a purpose of it. The purpose is that in the mundane to find godliness, and that's the chiddush. That's what it goes back to the original question. Why did God create the world in such a way that we need to do fixing? Because He wants us to make those choices. To make the choices of the lasses of fixing. If you're just gonna to live the world the way it is, and say when it's Shabbos. Now it's week. When I'm in shul, I'm in shul. When I'm outside of shul, I'm outside of shul. When I'm like this, I'm like this. When I'm depending on where I am. So that's what's happening. So that's how things are. No, lasses, you have to make those changes. You have to integrate, bringing the holiness within the space and time. Like it says, Tumr sin tzrichin tikkun. There's certain foods that the only way to eat it is through a lot of effort. That it's bitter, it's like a bitter lentil, and in order to make it pleasant, misikoy means sweet and edible, it has to go through a hard process. Like we talk about ibidoiras, breaking the hides. You're not gonna make parchment or leather out of just taking the skin off an animal. It's a process, it takes a lot, it's a hard process. If only when you work on Erev Shabbos in the weekday, in the proper mindset, you can have what to eat spiritually on Shabbos. You can't just do a whole week forgetting about godliness and God and run into Shabbos, put on your Shabbos clothes and say, wow, it's spiritual time. It doesn't work like that. If you work on the weekday properly, in the lasais, in the tikkun, in the fixing and making the world a dwelling place for Hashem, then you have what to eat on Shabbos spiritually. The idea is to elevate your mundane to Shabbos. Shabbos means to rest from the mundane. But in order to get to that level of rest, you have it's an avoida. Bechinas bitul, you have to reach the level of nullification, like the Shemona Esrei, like the Amida. When we daven, we stand there and we make no movement. You can't just say, well, I'm just going to stand the whole day and daven the Amida. I'm just never going to leave Shabbos. No, God says go out during the week. But you have to make the choices of elevating the week as much as possible into the spirit of Shabbos. It has to be days of week. And that's the idea of circumcision. So here the Rebbe is introducing kind of a double idea here, which he speaks, the Alter Rebbe speaks about, and it's an idea of Chassidus. Seemingly, Avram, without a hay, he's on a lower level, and he gets elevated to the higher level. And Chassidus, it looks at it's not so much like that. That actually Avram is so high, but the problem is it's disconnected. It's Av, that's Ram, disconnected. Ram means like elevated. But that's not the purpose of creation, to be that there's an existence of holiness outside of reality, of my reality, of your reality, of the reality, the perception of reality. That just shows you that there's a concept of holiness. What's that have to do with me? Avram is Avram the way he's separate from the world. But so God says, that's not what I want from you. I want you to be Av Hamoin Goyim. I want the world to be affected by you. So he says, actually, until Avram circumcises himself, or is told to circumcise himself, he's Avram. Avu b'chinas reishis agili. Av means like father, like we say Chachma, and in the Maamar before, He calls it Seichel Hanel Mikol Rayin. It's not just Chachma. It's Chachma, it's wisdom without any possibility for an idea. It's so beyond reality. So it's Bechinis Reishis Agil, the beginning of revelation. Yesh Miyayin, something from nothing. Shumokra Ashpa, that's the source of the flow. It's called Av. Who Bechinis Rama Kol Goyim. He's separate from the nations. Avram has no connection. Although Abram did a lot and Sarai did a lot, both of them. That's why Sarai also has a yud. It has to be changed to hey. A yud also is that same idea as the dot, separate. So Abram and Sarah, though they even interacted, but it was on a level of separation. There was this huge separation. There was no connection he had to the goyim properly. God said, that's not what I want from you. You need to change the world. Av hamoin goyim, you're the father of the nations. Lahoisiv iskalas nitzutzis, you have to bring inclusiveness of the sparks. The ability to take the sparks and bring them to holiness. There shouldn't be such a separation. You have to separate. You have to the milas again. What's the idea of mila, of circumcision? Again, what's not the idea of cutting off only, because there's both sides here. There's lech lecha, that you leave terach, leave your father's home, which is a house of idol worship, and go to the land of Israel. And then there's lech lecha, leave the higher levels and go down and be affected. So same thing with circumcision. There's the foreskin that's making yourself holy, pure, and there's a foreskin of revelation. So he says that's the idea of mila. Ki mila oisis mol yudke, to be able to bring mol, to reveal the first two letters of God's name, which is Chachma Bina. The Av in Avram should be Av Haman Goyim. He has to bring it to the nations, not be separate than the nations. Umal hu lashon is galas. The mol means to reveal. Kimol lashon emal, like when a person talks. When you talk, you reveal what you have to say, what you're thinking. Shadibur hu megala as a chachma li as a chachma yetz mekach el hapoyel. When a person has wisdom, so if you don't communicate it, mol. That's why in Aramaic, mol means to speak. It means it's a process of revelation. You're revealing something from potential to actual. From concealment to the revelation. Therefore, Mashiach comes, and this is going to be the ultimate level of revelation. It says, everyone's going to talk a clear language. What does it mean, a clear language? Today, the narrative is so confusing and so manipulated that when Mashiach comes, it's going to be that everyone's going to have a clarity, Safa Bruda, of godliness, purpose, and revelation. Everyone's going to see. Yachtav kipi Hashem dibra. This is God's word, that the creation is Baruch Sha'amar. God spoke, and the world came into existence. Because through the Mashiach comes, there's going to be the level of revelation. There's no longer going to be concealment. He's Galas Alikus, revelation of godliness. That's when people say, well, what does it mean, Mashiach? Mashiach is revelation. That no longer are we going to live in the darkness. He's Galas Chachma, we're going to see God's wisdom. And this idea of this revelation, there's times of chashais, itim chashais, sometimes there has to be concealment. Sometimes things are not revealed. And that happens sometimes in our own life. There's times that we don't understand things. We don't understand what's going on. I sat with someone yesterday, he was like, I have 97% bitachon. I just don't understand what's happening. He was going through a health crisis. So you have chashai, sometimes we don't have revelation. Like it says, siyag l'chach mashtika, sometimes God has to make a siyag, a separation, a boundary, limitations. And if you want to make limitations to wisdom, be quiet, don't reveal. But sometimes there has to be revelation. And sometimes in our own life, we have these moments where God sees, or for reasons that maybe we don't understand, where He knows that you need to see something. You need revelation. Sometimes you don't have the revelation. But there's itim chashais, itim mamalois. That's what means chashmal, which is incidentally, that's what the modern Hebrew calls electricity, because sometimes there's the flow, sometimes there's not. The gam mal milashin v'hu yoshev muli. Also, mal means interaction. He's sitting opposite me. Like you see someone sitting right in front of you, in front of your eyes. And we say by a person also, a person should be made in our form and our image. And that's why also when it comes to the circumcision and the place of circumcision, that there was initially the foreskin, which was the idea, because where the mashpia comes from, the idea of giving comes from the place of the milah, of circumcision. Sometimes you have to give, and sometimes you have to hold back. Like it says, "Hanistaros l'Hashem Elokeinu." Sometimes there's things that are hidden. Chacham ubina v'niglas lanu v'neinu, and what's the revelation to us and our children? Shaydei amila nasi niglas lanu v'neinu. That the Rebbe says also that the idea is that when a person properly behaves in their sexual activity, etc., so then it's lanu v'neinu. Then the revelations comes properly to your children. Shagili ein el b'chinas levaneinu, that the revelation only comes to your children. Shebechinas halada, which is to give birth. And also godliness. He said there's sometimes some things are revealed, and then the Torah was given to his levanenu, to his children. This is what the idea of the hay given to Abram was. God didn't take out the rum, the elevation of Abram. He just said you are elevated. Sometimes you have to be withdrawn. Sometimes you have to be concealed. Sometimes you have to know this is not a moment of giving. But you shouldn't constantly live that way. But you have to have a balance of reish and hay. You have to have the rum and the hamoin goyim. Like the idea of the foreskin. For that, the foreskin, there's total concealment. But the foreskin, by having a circumcision, means itim chashay. Sometimes it's times for to not be revealed. Hanistarais, of hiding, and sometimes it's aniglois. But there has to be the possibility of both. The idea is that sometimes this elevation has to be revealed. And also and not just in times, but also in consistency. That you have to have within yourself the idea of you're separate, you have rum, you're elevated from the mundane, nevertheless you affect the mundane. That's the rum and the hamoin goyim. Avram didn't become like the nations. He didn't say, well, how am I going to have a conversation with these people? I have to start shooting darts and throwing axes and doing everything, playing golf. That's the only way to interact. Sometimes that's required. But Avram was able to say the same Avram, he's a separate person, an elevated person, a spiritually motivated person, and also hamoin to be effective. And that's the idea of circumcision, is to reveal the elevation of Avram. And when you do the priya, which is the circumcision, then there's the tearing open of the skin. Like it says, Uparas Reisha Isha. Shchita mufras is different levels of priya, which means revelation, which is a masach hamavdim and kodesh Israel, to bring this this masach, this separation that separates between holiness and Shabbos, and to the Jewish person that the chol gets affected by the kodesh, which means chulin shenasal taras kodesh. Yes, we go out to the week. Yes, we're in the mundane, but we do with the mindset of ram, of elevation, which is based on the idea of taras kodesh, with the mindset of holiness and purity. Sheikra avdal, that's the idea of separation. I separate the benefit of the separation is that when we separate for holiness, because like he finishes off, like I said before, we don't talk about the separation between pure and impure. Which if we said before that, it means when we said, like we said before, that the idea of the blessing of the separation on Motzei Shabbos is not just a statement that Shabbos is separate than the week, but it's an integration between Shabbos and the week. So therefore, we don't say that God who separates from pure to impure, because we're not supposed to get impure. Don't go out and become tamei. Say that how do I bring godliness to the world is by making myself tamei. Maybe that's a real level of integration. No, you have to be ram. You have to know that certain things are not for you. Itim chashes. Sometimes this is not a time to communicate. You don't have to be part of every party. But at the same time, you have to be the niglois revelation of Memalel. And that's why we don't say lahavdil ben atam letar on Motzei Shabbos, the one who separates from pure to impure. Because the process is to bring through the separation. And we're not going to bring through the separation to a moment of impurity. We don't say that's not what's required. We're separating the Shabbos to the week and bringing Shabbos into the week, but to a limit. Right, this is a beautiful Maamar that's kind of in the spirit, so to say, of the Maamarim of this week, and there's other Maamarim that are very special that that we have 20 minutes. I don't know. Maybe it's late, but I'll just do you guys. Let's do a small Maamar over here. I don't know if we ever learned this Maamar. It's the question of why. It deals with the question of why that it says that Abram Yashkem Avram Baboker. Avram is the morning person, Yitzchak is the afternoon person, and Yaakov is the evening person. That's why Avram introduces the morning prayer, and Yitzchak introduces the afternoon prayer, Mincha, and Yaakov is the one who introduces Arvis. Not that they didn't have in the other ones, but that's their moment. So Avram is the morning person. So the question is, why do we say Magen Avram, God who is the shield of Avram? So seemingly it's saying that God protects Avram. But Magen also is protecting the world from Avram. So you could look at which way is the shield, who's being protected. Is Avram being protected from the outside elements? Or, so to say, is the world being protected from Avram? So here the Alter Rebbe introduces the idea, so to say, that Avram himself needs to be kind of toned down a bit. He's too much chesed, too much kindness. Let's see. The Hinenoid that's known, Avram hu b'chinas chesed godel ad moed. Avram represents absolute kindness. There's nothing that stops Avram's need and want to be kind, to be kind, to be giving. The kulam tovim beinav, not just to be giving in moments, again in time, but also to peoples. As far as Avram's concerned, everyone's worthy of his kindness. V'hu rak tov, he only sees good in people and he only wants to do good for people. Therefore, when in this week's parsha, God says you're going to have Yitzchak because Yishmael is not good enough for you, so to say, for what you need to do. Means Yishmael is your son and he's going to be blessed. But for what we're trying to do over here, that has to happen. Ki Yitzchak yikar lechazara. It's going to happen through Yitzchak. Avram argues, says Lu Yishmael yichel lefnecha. Why can't Yishmael live before you and make things work? Shapir sheyichel la'ad lefnecha. He wanted Yishmael that he should be that he should be able to be the son because he doesn't judge. And by him, everything is good. He said Yishmael should have a limitless connection to God. It wasn't like Avram had a blind eye. Sarah saw certain behaviors in Yishmael, and Avram refused to see it. He refused to apply what he saw to himself. He wasn't ready to judge Yishmael, notwithstanding of what he saw in his behavior. Because he's unlimited kindness. Right, so he wants Yishmael also to be able to stand before God constantly. He even was ready to give Yishmael, that Yishmael should be able to himself give chesed limitlessly, and that's very dangerous. Yishmael's chesed is a dangerous chesed. And that's why we say no. Like Avram, shiatzim men Yishmael. The perfection is not by Avram, because from Avram comes out of Yishmael. Why? What does it mean he came out of Avram? Because of Avram's great kindness that even Yishmael he even has a Yishmael. That's not balanced. That's too much good, too much kindness, unlimited. When Mashiach comes, you can't say that Yeshaya says death is going to stop. You can't allow bad to stay in the world. Avram says, just let everything be. And that's sorry, when Mashiach comes, the world is going through a process of refinement. Avram would say, what do you just leave death? Leave negative, let it be. And God says, no, it doesn't work like that. If we're just going to go with Avram's great kindness, we will never get to Mashiach. We will never get to the refinement without balance and discipline. So just overwhelming kindness, we're not going to achieve anything. You're not changing anything. You're just flowing in kindness without trying to elevate and change. And Mashiach is the world that gets to elevate to higher space where there is no negativity. You can't just let negativity exist. And Avram just has this tremendous chesed. So who comes to counter Avram? His son Yitzchak, which is din, judgment. Total opposite of Avram Avinu. But then that's also too bad. It's not good. There's no balance there. Too judgmental. What comes from Yitzchak? Af Yitzchak Yatzim and Esav comes out in Esav. Machmas Dinya Kosher. So where's Esav getting this whole anger? Right? How do you have a Holocaust? Comes from dinim kosher. Just the way it has to be. You just say you just see things square, and if they don't work, then you just kill everyone. You just lived on the sword, he cut everyone down. So therefore, Yitzchak also was too severe, too judgmental. So where do you have the balance? Yaakov. He was complete. That's why Yaakov is Tiferes. Tiferes is the ability. What's real beauty? Why is Tiferes beautiful? Because beauty is the ability to balance things. When a person's too one way, too extreme kindness, or too extreme din, judgment, and too reserved, and too limited, too square, so that's not either good. So the beautiful is the ability to find balance. So what's a Magen? What do you say Magen Avram? What is a Magen? Nikr is Davram Chassid. Again, the whole idea of the parsha is things that cover. The Mashal Mechama, for instance, when you have a war, Nikr Magen Mashal Mechassid Shlo Yishlat Elav Keshes. A person has a shield, so you can't get hit with the arrows from the Keshes, is the bow and arrow. V'nichsiv, like it says, Kishem Magen Havaya Elkim. That there's Havaya, Yitki Vavke. But just like there's a sun, and the sun has a shield, so to say, that otherwise the light of the sun would be too strong. So to Elikim, Teva, nature, conceals godliness. Because if godliness, Yudke Vavke, is shining, there would be no separation. If not for the screens on the sun, right, the ozone layer, whatever you have, that shields the world from the light of the sun, the light would be too strong. So what's being protected? The world's being protected by the sun. The sun is too strong, too powerful. So too, Abram needs to be protected. The Magen, the shield, is on Abram, not protecting Abram, protecting the world from Abram. It's too much kindness. When Mashiach comes, then the sun, the world's going to be ready. That's going to be extreme. Tzadikim isnam, the righteous are going to take joy. They're going to be able to handle the light of the sun. But Rishayim Nidainimba, the Gemara says, the wicked are going to be judged by the sun. We know, like I said before, every morning Avram wakes up. That's why there's a lot of things we're supposed to do in the morning. We give tzedakah in the morning. There's the idea of davening in the morning right away. There's, like, for instance, before Yom Kippur, we make sure to do the kaparis in the morning. We know that the chesed is in the morning. That's the chesed of Avram. So it says every morning, every morning of Abram is chesed misari ba'olam. The world wakes up with a tremendous level of kindness. By Yashkim Avram aboker, Avram wakes up in the morning. Chesed wakes up in the morning. Like the Holy Zohar says, Hakadosh Baruch Hu writes chesed. And Avram, it's not just Avram. Avram affects, so to say, the attitude of God. He's a Merkava of God, that God, initial reaction to the world is chesed. But if we won't shield that chesed, that kindness, that there shouldn't be an overwhelming abundance of kindness, because we said too much kindness isn't good. And we shouldn't find that it should be limited, the kindness, and it should be mitzamtzem, it should be restrained. For instance, just to give life to the negative forces, but not to give them an abundance of life. Because a person needs to have tests in this world. I mean, if there's only holiness, then the person would never have a choice. So God gives only a little bit of kindness, so negative could exist. So a person should choose good. She is chapcha, so a person should go through the process of transformation. So the fact that you need to transform yourself, darkness to light, or to restrain yourself. So there has to be something to restrain from. But that's it. Not that we're giving the kindness just in an abundance to give life to negativity. But if there wouldn't be a tzimtzum, the Magen of Avram, then the negative would have its own life source, not just to be there as part of the avoda of overcoming the darkness. We would never be able to win the bad. If bad was getting as much as good was getting, you would never win the bad. The bad would be kind of a chaotic world. That's why the world is tohu before the flood, before Avram. Every morning when Avram wakes up, which is the attribute of kindness, which sort of says God's mindset, is the mindset of Avram in the morning. Therefore we make the bracha Magen Avram. We tell God, you need to shield Avram. Magin shiyasa magin l'mechinas Avram. You need a concealed Avrams. You need to shield the world from Avram, because Avram's chesed is so strong that it won't give any place for change, won't give any place for a person to overcome negativity, because negativity will have its own life force, and therefore it's l'toivos seinu, it's for our own good. Even though you say, what do you mean? You're concealing goodness, but if there's no discipline, then there's overwhelming goodness. It's not really a favor. You're not helping the child by giving in and giving in and giving in. Sometimes there has to be discipline, tough love. So therefore, as we say to God, Magen Avram, shield the world from Abram. Yes, Abram's his intentions are good. He wants to be good. He's always abundance of kindness. Yishmael lives. Everything lives. But we say Magen Avram. We need to put a shield on that. We need to put a cap on that. Otherwise, it's an overwhelming goodness, and it's not the purpose of creation. All right, this is a very beautiful, famous small mimer. Thank you everyone for joining. I think next week we change the clocks ready by Sunday night. So we're going to be, we've already changed the clock here in Eretz Yisrael, but we'll change it next week in Chutz La'aretz in the United States as well. So we'll be on a different time. Laila Tov, take care.
Thanks, Rebbe.